Surviving the Survivor.
What's up, STS Nation, and welcome back to another exciting episode. Of course, it has been a month and 3 days, still no suspect in these Idaho murders, and still no murder weapon. Hard to believe, or maybe not so hard to believe. We're going to talk to our experts about this in just a moment. Quick shameless plug. Takes a lot of work to do these podcasts, so if you'd like, we'd love some support on Patreon. You go to Patreon, plug in Surviving the Survivor. You get some ad-free content, behind-the-scenes footage, and our first virtual meet and greet with the Queen herself, Carmela Waldman, is slated for January 5th. She is a Holocaust survivor, is a true crime addict. She's also a licensed therapist, so she can talk about just about anything. So we would appreciate that. Without further ado, the woman on the bottom, got some of the sharpest women in the world on this podcast tonight, and they're investigators. They know what they're doing. The first woman, Tracy Walder. She's one of the few women to serve in both the Directorate of Operations at the CIA and as a special agent at the FBI. Turns out we have a mutual friend from the CIA. From 2000 to 2004, Tracy served the CIA's Counterterrorism Center Weapons of Mass Destruction Group, followed by the FBI's Chinese Counterintelligence team. During her time at the CIA, Tracy traveled to war zones in many other countries and met with President George W. Bush on several occasions. After leaving the CIA, Tracy became a special agent at the FBI's Los Angeles field office, specializing in Chinese counterintelligence operations. I need to get my kids to learn Mandarin. Tracy now works as an author and adjunct professor of criminal justice at TCU, which is Texas Christian University, and she's the author of The Unexpected Spy. And there's an unexpected cough as I'm dealing with a little cold, so I apologize. On top of her, Monica Jordan, the great Monica Jordan, who's in 2 episodes in one day through the magic of television. She is the president of Jordan Research and Consulting, one of the nation's most sought-after private investigators. She does not mess around. Her firm is based in Tallahassee, where she concentrates primarily on criminal defense and civil cases in federal and state trial and appellate courts throughout the United States. She's handled more than 50 death penalty cases. Among the names, Eileen Wuornos, the movie The Monster was made about her, a serial killer from the great state of Florida. So thank you, one and all. Appreciate you guys being here. Obviously, people are riveted by this case, and I start each show. I like to say the names of the victims because oftentimes this becomes a whodunit and we forget about them. Apologies again as I get over this cold, but let us never forget the young lives lost way too soon. We've got Madison Mogan, 21, Kaylee Gonzalez, 21, Xana Kernodle, 20, and Ethan Chapin. So there was a press release, essentially, instead of a news conference that was released, I believe it was yesterday, 2 days ago when this airs. And then it's been sort of updated since then in terms of honoring the 1 month mark. Police say that the first call that local police made after murders was to the Idaho State Police to have their investigative team come help. I just want to dissect this a little bit. Monica, to you first. Does it make sense? The first thing you're going to do if you're a small jurisdiction is call the state police to come on in.
I think so. I mean, they have stronger resources. And if you're dealing with a really small municipality, a small local office, they may not have the forensic processing team that the state police would have. So I actually think that was probably pretty smart of them to call in all the resources. I mean, it's not every day you walk in and you find 4 dead young adults. I mean, that's pretty shocking in any community. And I kind of have to tip my hat to their local police department because they did not let ego get in the way. And they said, listen, this may be a little above our pay grade and we might need more resources. So I thought that was a good thing to do.
You know, I want to dissect what police are saying because I think that's important. That's public information. Before we get there, I'd be remiss because you are 2 of the best in the country when it comes to investigative work and profiling and things of that nature. So, Tracy, to you, just a bird's eye, 360-degree view. What are your thoughts on this case in general? I mean, when you look at this, are you surprised it's been a month and 3 days by the time this airs, that the crime has gone unsolved? Is there anything that stands out to you in particular?
So first, I totally agree with Monica in that I'm very impressed by this local police department. It's actually somewhat rare sometimes. A lot of times they do let ego get in the way. And so I think it's very impressive that they have been very much willing to bring in outside help. They definitely seem to know what their limits are and what the limits of their resources are. In terms of the fact that this has taken so long, I've said this before, I think sometimes we're dealing with what I like to call the pop culture effect, right? The idea that, you see Criminal Minds or CSI and you get, like DNA analysis back in 25 seconds, right? Like it's just not how it works. And so I do think that in a case like this, whereas Monica was saying, you don't find 4 young folks slaughtered basically in a house every day, you are dealing with an overabundance of evidence. I mean, just probably a treasure trove of evidence, in my best guess. That takes time to process all of that. And I think that the police chief has said this before, they're not just looking for an arrest, they want a full and robust prosecution. And able to do that, they really have to methodically go through a lot of this evidence. And so I'm actually, unless a DNA hit came back in CODIS right away, which I actually don't think it's going to in a case like this, I don't think the person's DNA is in CODIS. It's going
to. I'm curious, not to interrupt, but I just did. Why do you say you don't think it would be in CODIS, which is the national database for those who don't know for DNA? Why would it not be there?
So, I'm sorry, I didn't clarify that. Again, this is just my hypothesis, right? I can only hypothesize at this point. I wasn't there. I don't know what happened. I'm not, actually working the case for law enforcement. I just don't think that this is someone who has been caught offending before. They may have offended before, but I don't think it's someone who's been caught offending before. Therefore, their DNA is most likely not in CODIS, which is the national database.
And Monica, do you agree with that assessment? Do you think this is someone who's not been caught before?
That's probably more in Tracy's wheelhouse. But I was going to add that, when she hit the nail right on the head when she talks about this pop culture and our instant gratification. I mean, we had a case similar here, three dead babies, a dead mom. It took law enforcement 10 months to make an arrest. And that's when they knew they had a primary suspect the first day. There was just so much evidence. You don't just collect some blood samples and then go feed it through a machine and voila, it prints out a picture of your suspect. That's the problem they're going to have here. In Markel, it took 2 years for them to finally make an arrest on, Sigfrido and Luis Rivera. Danny Rollins, a terrible murder case at the University of Florida from the 90s, where they were just decapitating people and putting their heads on shelves. It took them almost a year to arrest him. So this is probably the worst thing for these families, because every day they want something. But I think we have to be prepared that this is going to take a long time. I just don't think it's going to be even harder if the person's DNA is not in CODIS or their fingerprints are not in some database somewhere. I think that could slow the process down. And that is a terrible thing to have to tell, a mother or a father that's burying their freshman or sophomore, any age child, really.
It's interesting. We had a gentleman named Joseph Scott Morgan, who we'll have back on. He's a nationally recognized forensic expert, and not long after the murders, he compared it to the Danny Rawling case, and that's what the movie Scream is loosely based on. And then to your point, Tracy, people think it's like Criminal Minds. Last night, we had Bobby Chacon from the FBI on, who wrote a few episodes of Criminal Minds, right. And he pointed out it is definitely not like TV. It takes time. Back to this sort of abridged and slightly changed police virtual presser. That's what I call it, because it's not a news conference per se. They're just putting it up on the website. Some of the other takeaways, police say that the scene wasn't chaos, but it was very, very somber. Many college students standing outside and a lot of crying, friends trying to find out who was inside the house. Some family members arrived on scene. You're an investigator, Monica. Let's just say you're leading this investigation. You walk into that crime scene. What's the first thing you do? How do you approach this? It's such a massive and heinous scene.
Well, I do defense work, so my wheelhouse is for after they catch the guy, and then I Monday morning quarterback everything they did wrong, or how they could have done it better.
And that's really interesting, because that came up a lot yesterday in my conversation. So I had on Chris Anderson, who was on the show 48 Hours, along with Bobby Chacon, and they kept bringing up this very important point. And I think you can talk to this, Monica. You don't want to just solve the case, but you want it to be prosecuted for a victory, right?
Well, listen,
So
I can't think of anything worse for the victims, the survivors, those surviving roommates, the rest of these students, these parents, all of these people in the world that are, watching this. I cannot think of something worse than to catch somebody and then we have fumbled it on the 1 yard line and you don't get a conviction. I mean, I think we saw that in the OJ case where the whole world, was so mesmerized with this trial, and they watched it for a year or 6 months or however long, and everyone had an opinion. Everybody thought they had a law degree. Everybody thought they were a cop. And I just think I would rather do it right and get the right person, because a worse thing than not being able to convict somebody in this is to convict the wrong person. Then you're just compounding a tragedy like exponentially.
And there's such a it's obviously such a high profile case in a different way than the Dan Markel case, Monica, which we've had you on for. This is obviously something very fluid right now. They don't know who the killer or killers are, and there's just such immense pressure that you don't want investigators to fall short on something because they feel the enormity of the gravity of the crime that they're trying to solve. But Tracy, to you, this I think you can talk about as well. The police go on to say it was really hard on some young officers who were very young, a little redundant. It was the first crime scene they had encountered, a very draining day. You've been in some very dangerous places during inauspicious times. How difficult can this be on someone who's coming into a scene like this?
Sure. I think I'm an open book about this. I have diagnosed PTSD. Your friend Mark and I, we talk about it all the time. I've seen some things. Obviously, I've seen death. I've had to put handcuffs on kids before. I've had to do things that I think are difficult. And I was quite young at the time. And those things do stay with you forever. We kind of call it the dark side of policing, right? And those are things that sometimes police departments, particularly one of this size, which is small and doesn't have a lot of resources, they may not be dealing well with the mental health aftermath of some of their police officers, right? We know that a lot of times police officers have high alcohol addiction rates, high suicide rates, those kinds of things. And so, yes, this is something that is incredibly difficult. You have to remember some of these police officers could have been 22, 23, really within 2 to 3 years of these same college students, and may see themselves in them. And not to mention some of them may be fathers, mothers of college students, right? And so I think they're seeing a lot of their own lives, whether it's themselves or their children, in these victims. And that is hugely traumatic. I think it's also hugely traumatic, at least this is sometimes how I felt, to realize what humans are capable of. I just remember seeing, some really graphic things and some graphic crime scenes and thinking, wow, there's a dark side of humanity, right? And not to get too cerebral, that I never thought about as being possible. And so I think that those are very real things. I don't think that this police department has seen a crime of this scale and of that nature. And really some pretty gruesome details have sort of come out, which are surprising to me. They were talking about bagging their hands and those kinds of things, which is all normal, actual standard operating procedure. But I think the public, that's gruesome to the public if it's not something they're used to dealing with and talking about.
And that's something I was going to bring up, some of the details. Quick shout out to Mark Polymeropoulos, your friend from the CIA, my friend from childhood. This is our hometown, an homage to Highland Park, New Jersey. And I just realized there's his book right there, Clarity in Crisis. Mark is an expert in being clear at times of crises. So hopefully, Tracy, you and Mark will come back on this podcast now that I've publicly announced it. I'm going to shame him into coming on, and you can text him. So they also say, and you can speak to this, the FBI got involved almost immediately. This is local police saying this. They put a system in place to process the information coming in. There have been a lot of emotional highs and lows over the month, they say, but an incredible amount of teamwork. Tracy, if you could, how is the coordination, how does it work between FBI, state, and local? And the FBI needs to be invited in, as I understand. Is that correct?
That's correct. And Monica said this really right out of the gate. I really do commend, I know there's been some talk that people don't think they're capable, but I really do commend this local law enforcement. I think the fact that they recognize right off the bat, hey, we're way in over our head here, is huge. And then the fact that the state realized, you know what, the FBI has some evidence processing capabilities that we don't have, just in terms of phone analysis, cell phone tower analysis, the CAS system that they have to go through all of that data. Typically, state police don't have that. Some do, some don't. It really just depends. So yes, they have to be invited in, and they were invited in almost immediately. And I think, again, that speaks to the lack of ego, I guess, and the desire to solve this case from the police department, both state and local. They sort of put that aside and said, hey, FBI, we need this, we're in way overhead. And the FBI really does have pretty good ways at dealing with tips, dealing with information as it comes in, and cataloging all of that. They have the ability to do that a lot faster.
By the way, I become my mother. I realized I'm coughing, I'm sneezing, I'm chewing on cough drops, but that's what happens when you have a cold. So I apologize again, because I know I actually get a lot more hate mail about me making fun of my mother for this, but I've now become her. So I'll get the hate mail for the coughing and for making fun of my mother. So the double whammy. So to continue to kind of break down this, what the police had to say about what it's been like over the last month. Monica, to you, they say the general public does not have an idea of the scope of the investigation and the number of people involved. The FBI command post is in the Moscow Police Department. Everything they would normally do is in Salt Lake City, that they would normally do in Salt Lake City, which is like just their regional office. They're now doing in the police parking lot. But that's a big statement that the general public does not have an idea of the scope. There are a gazillion cyber sleuths out there, right, Monica, who think they know better, who are very critical of law enforcement. What say you, as Bill O'Reilly, who I can't stand, would say? What would you say to those people?
Everybody wants to be a pirate till it's time to do pirate shit. And I mean, these cyber sleuths, I recognize that, and I appreciate that. And maybe a tip, I mean, we have these people with the car, this white Elantra or Hyundai, whatever, and every little bit helps. But let me give you an example. They're investigating this white vehicle as this hot new tip. And we've expended a lot of resources looking into that. And maybe when we find out who's in the car, that's great. My fear is that we've expended all of, they've expended all of this resources tracking down this white car and trying to figure it out. Well, if we've spent days doing this and it turns out it's some kids that snuck out, they were underage drinkers, they took their mom's car, now's the time to tell your mom what you did, because we need to put this to bed, so we're not spending 5 agents' time running down a bunch of kids that snuck out and tried to get some beer at the convenience store, because they're probably not the killer. I just don't want to see, when we run, and Tracy probably understands this better than anybody, when we expend resources on things that turn out to be nothing, I'm not downplaying their importance, but it's all important, but let's not waste the resources when we have other things that we could be looking at.
And to your point, they put that tip out last week about the 2011 to 2013 Hyundai Elantra, as you just alluded to. And so many tips came in, whether it's something or nothing, that they actually had to redirect calls through the FBI because they got so many tips. So is that concerning at all to you, Tracy, that you make mention of one thing and it's just a flood of tips coming in?
Yes, for the lack of a better word, it's very concerning because it feels like a wild goose chase sometimes, right? And then you're almost playing whack-a-mole, right? Like it's kind of akin to that game. And in whack-a-mole, really, is anyone winning? I don't know, not until they're really all dead, right? And so the problem is when you're expending, like Monica said, all of these resources. I think part of the problem, and I've said this before in terms of law enforcement there, what I find fascinating, and I know this isn't your question, but what I find fascinating, and I don't know, Monica, you can tell me what you think about this too, is that they're doing these updates or pressers digitally, right? They're just like posting it to their website, which I don't typically see that, right? In crimes of this nature. It's just not something that we see. And I think part of that is because law enforcement, I do think the one thing they have done incorrectly is communication. They just haven't done a good job of it, right? The house was a target. It wasn't a target. Everyone's safe. It's a target, right? Like going back and forth. And that's what creates that public distrust. So I think going back to the Hyundai, the messaging and how they're getting that tip out there, if they couched it like what Monica was saying, hey, you're not necessarily in trouble. We just need to understand why you were there and where you were there. Maybe that might help someone come forward, right? But right now it's just very vague in terms of why they're looking for it. And I think they need to be a bit more specific and a bit more clear in their messaging. That's been their biggest problem.
Which leads to another point that they bring up, the police department in Moscow, and they say that rumors and speculation on social media have been by far the most frustrating part of this. They're trying to protect the integrity of the investigation, but rumors are flying on social media. So to you, Monica, I know you primarily do investigative work on behalf of defendants, but how difficult is it to kind of separate the wheat from the chaff here and stay diligent as an investigator, knowing that there are rumors flying around that could upend it in some way?
Well, as you know, the first thing I thought right after I said, this Hyundais could be a nothing burger. I'm like, well, won't that be something if that's the killers are driving the white Hyundai? I'll look like the biggest idiot. But my point is that, you have to check it all out. You have to verify the information, but it's really important. And you see this a lot. You don't want a Richard Jewell situation in the Atlanta bombings. You don't want to take some reporters or some person's misinformation or misinterpretation of data and run with it. And the next thing you know, you have tunnel vision. You're now forcing everything to point towards somebody that is really a non-issue. And now you run the risk of, like I said, a bigger miscarriage of justice than a conviction is a wrongful conviction, because now you've not given anybody anything. It's certainly not the family. But as far as I believe you have to check all of that stuff to kind of to put it to bed, I guess, for a lack of a better analogy. It's like it has to be looked at.
It's like a catch-22. You're kind of damned if you do, damned if you don't, but you've got to make sure you're checking everything.
Right, but the second you put I agree with Tracy completely. I've never been doing this almost 30 years. I've done over 100 death penalty cases, 50 trials. I've never seen law enforcement just kind of put it out there. Somebody has to have a press conference. Even when they say dumb things, you're like, well, they have to answer some questions. I believe they're so worried about letting something slip, answering a question, that they feel like the safest thing to do is stay silent. But what happens is when you put stuff out on a presser, people run with it. And just like this white car, this white car could be a really big thing, or it could be nothing.
Well, I can tell you as a former member of the quote unquote mainstream media, having worked for Fox News, the FBI is obviously notoriously tight-lipped. They do their work, they put their heads down, they do their work. Local municipalities and the state generally does hold press conferences, especially when it's something this high profile. But you're right. They're not doing it right now. Is it a mistake? I guess time will tell, but the information is certainly limited. To that point, one of the last points Moscow police made in this virtual release is they say that the case is not cold. They say they're getting tips every day that are viable. Tracy, what do you make of that? Because I had this guy, this forensics expert on, I mentioned Joseph Scott Morgan. He said this case won't go cold for 2 or 3 years because it's so high profile. Is he right about that? You're shaking your head yes.
Yes, I completely agree with him. So, a couple stats, I guess, if that makes people happy. Just what I do in my daily work with teaching is, the FBI's uniform crime reports, right? So about 40% of cases a year are not solved. 40% of homicides. That's actually normal. We never look at that statistic, right? Because I think most people just don't through their daily work. Why would you? But when you hear that, that's really big. And theoretically, a case isn't truly considered cold. Each state has different ways that they look at that. But I would say nationwide, if you look at the conglomerate of data, for about 3 years, that's when a case is considered cold, if there's been no leads. And so I actually agree with him. I also think that because of the sheer volume of press and tips that this is getting, it ain't going anywhere anytime soon. But if it's okay with you, can I just add one point about the police officer? And I think, Monica, this is interesting because it brings the defense side into it. I think what we're also dealing with local police departments, particularly small ones, is the Uvalde effect. If you look at what happened in Uvalde, that was a small local police force that then brought in Texas Department of Public Safety, right? And then the FBI and ATF and all those other organizations, Border Patrol, all got involved. And now those police officers are under investigation for misconduct and all of those kinds of things. And that, we all know, the communication in that was handled abysmally. And so I think that they are just erring on this side of like an overabundance of caution of not talking, but that's bad, right? Because then people sort of go down these rabbit holes and we're chasing these leads. But I really think that Uvalde, obviously it's a multitude of other things. It's not the same case, but it's the same in terms of local law enforcement attention.
But Tracy, I am correct, right? The FBI sort of has a history of keeping their mouths closed, right?
100%. The FBI, absolutely. I never talked about the cases that I did, and I was told never to talk about the cases that I did. I also worked at the CIA too, where I went in jail if I talked about anything. And so that is the norm. And I'm not saying that that's good, bad, whatever. But I also think that the local police department probably sees what happened in Uvalde, Texas, and really probably doesn't want that happening there, because now that's turned into a couple different things. You're investigating the police department, you're investigating the shooter, you're investigating the school, right? Like all these, and they don't want that.
So Tracy brought this up. There have actually been a pair of Fox News Digital exclusive reports milling around the last couple of days. One is today, one was yesterday. Again, for full disclosure, I worked for them for many years, but in one of their stories, they say as part of the crime scene preservation, Idaho investigators bagged the victim's hands in an effort to save possible clues before moving their bodies out of the crime scene. This is according to the Latah County coroner, Kathy Mabbutt, who's been speaking quite a bit. That's SOP, Tracy. Does any of that surprise you? And does it surprise you that the county coroner has actually been speaking?
Yes, the latter surprises me, because typically when I was at the FBI, if there was a case that involved, the coroner, we would always get together in terms of what you say and what you don't say. We always worked with them, in terms of that. I am surprised. I don't know what's going on there. I have no idea how they work there, but I am surprised. However, I think to the public, wait, they put bags on their hands? Yes, you typically put paper bags on their hands because it's biological forensic evidence and it's paper bags that preserves that. That's not unusual. They want to know if maybe they got the DNA of the killer, right? If they were scratching or have defensive wounds. That's completely normal in a homicide investigation.
Then there's an other report, and this is maybe in your wheelhouse here, Monica. Detectives, according to this other Fox News report, collected 8 hours of surveillance video on Tuesday. That will be today or yesterday if you're watching this on Wednesday. So yesterday, collected 8 hours of surveillance video from a gas station in Moscow where a clerk saw a white sedan, which is the car that authorities were looking for, passing by at 3:45 in the morning. So this gas station clerk remembered seeing this car at 3:45 in the morning on the night of the unsolved stabbing deaths. And this overnight assistant manager told Fox News Digital that she personally went and reviewed the tapes while she had extra time over on her graveyard shift. She said she wasn't working the night of the murders, and she reached the quote unquote 3 o'clock hour and then spotted a white car. She took a picture of the screen, which you can find online. And she said, and I quote here, "I had a weird feeling to go get on the cameras," she said, meaning the security cameras. She said, asking that her name not be publicized out of safety concerns as a suspect remains at large. And this woman said the car drove by, quote unquote, real quick, she said, and turned down a side street off Highway 8. How potentially important or not important is this, Monica?
I think it's important because, like in the Markel case, they were able to get some footage from a Caltrans city bus that showed the Prius in the vicinity of where the Markel marital home was, and it tracked where they were driving. So what people don't understand is that they're constantly being filmed. Stop red light cameras, walk cameras, some person taking a selfie next door. We are videoed probably 75 times a day, if not more, and we don't even recognize it. So I do think this footage is very important. I think they may find something. If nothing, if it is a bunch of kids that snuck out in their mom's car, great, we're going to put it to bed. If it's somebody connected to this horrible massacre, then that's even better.
Tracy, your thoughts? I mean, on the importance of this possible surveillance video where this woman says she sees the car that she believes authorities are looking for?
So the importance there, at least from an FBI agent perspective, is corroboration, right? Corroboration of evidence. And then that helps you sort of lead down a trail. And that's kind of what I have always thought was important about the Hyundai. It was actually less about the car to me, which I know sounds silly, hear me out, and more about the source of that information. Where did it come from? Was it something that was caught on police body cam when they had those minor consumptions right on the football field, which in my opinion, that really could be nothing. Is this someone that saw it loitering, right? And took a picture of it and said, that's to me, really what's important there. And now what that is starting to speak to is source. So what that's again telling me is that the Hyundai is actually probably important. If you have police issuing, statements that we are looking for this, then that being corroborated by this gas station clerk. And like Monica said, I think that might be why people are frustrated, because they probably watch too much CSI, first of all. And then, like Monica was saying, we are videoed literally all day, every day through sources that we don't even know about. And I think people, particularly the younger than myself, sleuths at home, are just like, well, why can't they figure this out? They must have them on video. And they probably do. It's just the question of, where does that video start from and when do you start looking for it? Because otherwise it's just noise and it doesn't matter.
Well, just to add something to that, Tracy, I watched somebody, they were interviewing somebody from that local community, and they said, you can find out everything by my phone. You can just look at my phone. And it's like, yes, we'd love to. If the town everybody would love to turn in their phones and allow law enforcement to celebrate them without a warrant and without any probable cause, and go look at all your nudie pictures on your phone, and you're willing to do that, we'll have this solved lickety split. But the problem is everyone's not going to go turn their phone into the basket at the cops to go look through their phones. So people have this overarching misconception that, well, if they'll just look at the phone, they'll figure it out. Like, why are they dilly-dallying? It's like, listen, man, we have this thing called the Constitution. We're not just turning our phones over. And, but like I said, if that community would love to volunteer their phones to law enforcement, I'm sure they will find some analysts to Cellbrite them and find everything they've never wanted anybody ever to see.
No, and you're right.
Hashtag don't, I was gonna say hashtag don't mess with Monica. Tracy,
No.
I didn't mean to interrupt.
Oh, no, it's fine. Well, but I mean, like to Monica's point, look, I'm a geek, right? And so I looked, and Moscow really doesn't have a whole lot of towers. They just don't. It's small, right? Like, of course, they don't have a lot of cell phone towers. It's like normal. They have about 3 or 4. They have like 40 antennas. Okay, fine. But they only have 3 towers. So yeah, I'm sure the FBI has asked for a tower dump of cell phone numbers. But literally, that's all that is cell phone numbers. Then you have to go through and think about, okay, which ones were active at this location at this time? Is that even an accurate scope of where this person was? Then you can't just be like, okay, now I have this cell phone number. Hey, government, can you give me everything? That's all. You need a warrant to do that. That's a good thing. We shouldn't just be, in people's phones. And so then the government, as Monica knows, you have to show probable cause to obtain that warrant. So they're probably working on that, but all of this takes time.
But my whole point in explaining that is, people have this, like I said, that the cops are over there just screwing around, wasting time,
Eating donuts.
Look at the phones, and it's like, well, I mean, it's in their defense, in law enforcement's defense, they actually have to follow the rules. I mean, I'm sure if we just trimmed a little fat off the Constitution, they could make this all streamlined a little better. But I don't think as a nation, we really want that. That's kind of what makes us better than everybody else.
I'm curious, and since this is my show, I can ask. So Tracy, how did you get interested in all this? How did you wind up at the CIA and the FBI?
That is a very long story that I don't think you probably have time for.
Give me the 3 seconds. Is it something you wanted to do? Were you always interested in?
No, so that's why I like to tell people, I don't know how old all of you are, but I'm in my mid 40s, and we have to remember, like, growing up in my generation, CIA was depicted as, like, no offense to Sean Connery, but Sean Connery. And he was like some 65-year-old dude that I didn't necessarily like identify with, right? Like I didn't see myself in that kind of work at all. But I was interested in terrorism because of a dude named Osama bin Laden. I watched a video of him in my sorority house at USC in California. And I found him interesting. I didn't know what agency worked counterterrorism. This was like 1997. So I know that sounds silly and stupid, but it's really not if we think about like the geopolitics, right? At the time, it was like Oklahoma City was terrorism, Waco, Ruby Ridge, that was terrorism. And so on a whim, I gave them my application at a career fair at USC, and they called. So it's really short story. And
you know what? I think that with 9/11, by the way, I'm Mark Palmeropoulos' age. I just look a hell of a lot better, but he's smarter. He's gonna get mad at me for this. So, I think 9/11 rightfully impacted a lot of people to sort of do the right thing with what they wanted to do. You hear stories like that about, like Pat Tillman, the football player that was killed. But Monica, same to you. What got you interested in this line of work?
I always thought I would be in the legal field. I started as a runner for a law firm in South Florida, and they were just amazing. And then I went through college, and then I waived my admission to law school, and I took a job with a state agency that represented all death row inmates. And the goal was to save up enough money to get back to law school. Well, they just kind of were like, hey, here's a plane ticket, don't come back, go figure it out. And I was very young. And I just realized that this was way cooler than what the lawyers were doing. And that was it. I think we spoke about this the other day. You don't know what it's like to be a part of something where somebody has been wrongly convicted. And that does happen. And that is not what anybody wants. victims' families, victim advocates, victim rights groups. Nobody wants that. And that's what I've been doing.
So I asked a question. Here comes the hate mail right now, and I'm gonna
God.
put in my mouth. No, I was just thinking, like, if I crossed paths with Tracy in the supermarket here in Miami, my first thought would not be CIA, counterintelligence, FBI, right? But you can make the same analogy with the killer in Idaho. People have this image of this, Friday the 13th monster. And it could be someone who's very simple looking, someone that you would never suspect, right, Tracy?
I think it is.
You can't judge a book by its proverbial cover, correct?
Right. And, I think it is. And just to go back, so I started at CIA before September 11th. I was sitting in the Counterterrorism Center on 9/11. So it was quite an interesting day. I wish I was as cool as Pat Tillman and inspired by those events, but I was not. I was just a geek who thought Osama bin Laden was weird. In terms of you can't judge a book by its cover, I actually do think, and I have said this before on some other shows, that I do believe that the killer is probably, I don't want to say easily blends in, but, out and about, if that makes any sense. I don't think this is a Ted Kaczynski sort of situation, where they're existing in sort of the mountains of the North. I don't think that that's what's going on. And I do think it's someone who's actually been at the house before. I don't know if it's someone who's in their immediate group of friends, but I do think that this is someone who blends into society and is probably what makes all of this so scary, right? We all want to know what the boogeyman looks like, but we don't know what the boogeyman looks like. And that's what makes it scary.
Couple of more interesting kind of news tidbits, and then I'll move into some viewer comments because the viewers make the show and I want to make sure your voices are heard. This caught my attention. So, there are a couple of cable shows doing some good work on this coverage of this case. And I saw a segment last night and my ears perked up. That a retired detective out of California was in Idaho a week or so after the murders, maybe 10 days, and decided to go by the crime scene. He wasn't, allowed past the tape or anything, and sees what he believes is a glove. His name is Chris McDonough, a former homicide detective out of California. Love to get you on the show, Chris. And he confirmed that he handed this or pointed this glove out to police, and they took it, I guess, into evidence. So Tracy, to you, how can something be as obvious as that be overlooked potentially at a crime scene? Can something like that be overlooked? It's okay.
Pasted her face up against the door. I'm sorry.
No
Can
worries.
something like that be overlooked? I don't want to say never, right? Because if I say never, nothing is 100% certain. I have a hard time thinking, particularly because we have to remember the crime occurred before there was snow on the ground, right? And now there's snow on the ground. And so in my opinion, something like that would have been covered up, not brought to the surface, right? It may be a glove that somebody just dropped, right? That they've turned in as evidence. And, look, a pair of fresh eyes, in my opinion, is always a good thing. I don't think that ever hurts anything. But I have a hard time thinking they would have missed something as egregious as that.
Monica, would that surprise you to miss a glove? I mean, that would be a huge mess up, right?
Well, I mean, they missed all kinds of stuff in OJ, but I mean, I would say this.
Including the glove.
Correct. They had over 100, probably 100 personnel at some point or other gloved up on scene. And I don't know what kind of glove it is. I'm just completely speculating. Somebody pulled a glove off because they're collecting evidence and it's just one of those gloves, but you have to collect it. Again, when you have, this guy may be the best retired homicide detective in the universe, but I just feel like when people interject themselves onto a scene where everybody else is accounted for and their names are on lists, and you know, sometimes you have to take the DNA and the footprints and the shoe prints of the guys on scene to make sure you haven't cross-contaminated something, the DNA that comes back under a victim's fingernails, or, you know, any kind of DNA is not attributed back to one of the officers that were on scene. And so I think when you add these non-sworn or non-involved individuals, I think it makes you have a chance of contaminating the crime scene, and that is a problem for the prosecution. That is like a windfall for the defense. Oh, so who else was walking through the crime scene and dropping and finding gloves? I mean, it just, I'm not insinuating that anybody dropped and found a glove. I'm just saying you can see where things can get spun, and it takes away from the really the meat of the coconut of what we're trying to do, and that is to find the real evidence. And I will say this, I tell this to clients all the time that want to give blah, blah, blah stories that may not be completely accurate. And that is, you can't beat the science. I mean, the science is really tough. And if we start fudging evidence and how we locate objects that have DNA or any kind of scientific, you know, value, then you're contaminating the possible prosecution. And that's bad.
By the way, I love that Tracy Googled the number of cell towers in Moscow. I did not think to do that. Done like a true criminologist there, a person teaching criminology. So one other thing, and then we're going to get to some comments, but I had Jonathan Gillum on a few weeks, or maybe a week and a half, 2 weeks ago, and he's a former FBI agent and a Navy SEAL. And he in no way was saying that Steve Gonzalez, the father of one of the victims, is a suspect, but he made it very clear that everyone needs to be ruled out. And Steve Gonzalez has been speaking about not talking to the media. The one person who has been Stephen Gonzalez. He's spoken to the media extensively, and he came back out and again spoke to Fox News just a day or two ago and said that Kaylee, his daughter, had quote unquote big open gouges that were clearly the work of quote unquote a sadistic male. He then called police quote unquote cowards for not sharing more information with the public, and then recalls a conversation he had with the coroner saying, "She says, sir, I don't think stabs is the right word. It was like tears, like this was a strong weapon, not like a stab. She said these were big open gouges. She said it was quick. These weren't something you were going to be able to call 911. They were not going to slowly bleed out." Tracy, to you, how problematic is it to have someone so close to this crime, the father of one of the victims, revealing potentially very important, delicate information in terms of the investigation?
You know, I've stayed away a bit from trying to comment about him, and because the reality is I'm a mother, right? And I can't even begin to fathom what he and his family are going through. And, you know, a lot of times we see on police shows, oh, well, this person's loved one isn't acting the way that they should, right? Like, I don't know how that is supposed to be if we haven't been in a situation like that before. He is clearly a hurt man. He's clearly angry and going through all of these different emotions that he's having. We do know that the coroner has been sharing probably more than the local and state police have been sharing. And so he probably had to also identify her body, if we think about, you know, the gruesome details of that. And so I think the reality is he probably does know more information. And because of his frustration with local law enforcement, is just choosing to lay it all out there, right? But then this goes to sort of what Monica was talking about before. This now opens them up, right, to people making counterpoints to a lot of these arguments. And also, you know, what if a killer is caught and these aren't these huge gaping wounds? He's just, you know, kind of made all that up in his head. Then you run into problems with prosecution about that. So yes, this is not necessarily a good thing, but at the same time, I don't want to come down too hard on him because I can't even imagine what he's going through.
Monica, anything to add to that?
Yeah, I agree with Tracy. Nobody knows what they're going to do until they're in that situation. But what I have found in my experience is that when witnesses, when survivors, when any of those type people, they want to be heard, he is overwhelmingly frustrated with law enforcement because he cannot get some answers. And this is his way of trying to be heard. And you have to almost compartmentalize, you have to put him in a box as a parent. He's not a professional. He's trying to get answers. His kid has been massacred. So, I'm not going to be critical, but when you look at it from the other standpoint, Tracy's right. Things you're saying are going to come back and the prosecution's going to have to deal with it. But I think at the end of the day, if there was better communication between law enforcement and the victim's family, he's lashing out. He wants to be heard. He wants answers, and this is getting him heard. So I think you're going to see more of this, not less of this.
And I feel Tracy's pain. I have 3 kids, and it's a challenge every night. I have to stuff them into the corner room with my 2 dogs. And
I'm really
you never
sorry.
know.
Please don't. You really must know. I have a Pac-Man machine that's right here, and that's what she was doing after a piano lesson. But then she's 7, and I just really didn't want her listening to this. So my husband finally came home and took her.
We'll let her get to Pac-Man. I love Pac-Man, by the way. But let's take some viewer comments, because people really invest a lot of time. And if you'll indulge me for a few more minutes, the first comment is from Mickey O'Shea. If it was completely random, it seems the killer would select a house that is not so high risk, meaning so close to many neighbors, area with people who are up late on Saturdays, occupants could have a gun, there could have been guests coming over late at night to party or hang out. Is that a good point, Tracy?
Yes, I don't think it's random. I've never thought it was random. I've said since the day that it happened that it was a targeted attack. And the reason I think so is actually to go back to what Steve Gonsalves had said was, why go upstairs? We know they didn't enter from upstairs. They probably entered from, I guess, it's that basement floor, that first floor. And then, so they probably entered in from that first floor. And I absolutely do not think that this was a random attack. This was not a crime of opportunity.
Well, they think some people have said that they believe the killer entered from that glass slider. Is that what you're?
Yes. So you have that first floor that's like basically on the ground, right? And then where the 2 surviving ones were. Then you have that, I consider it the first floor for real, which is where Xana and Ethan were. And so that's the door that I believe that they went into. But again, this was a house that was known to have the doors open, doors unlocked, people coming in and out of it all of the time. I do not think that this was just some random crime of opportunity. To that person's point, they would have picked a much more isolated location.
Next comment comes from Sis for Coach. I've yet to hear somebody comment on why there were no bloody footprints leaving the house. I would appreciate any speculation. We don't like that word, but I would appreciate any speculation on that from a detective or an investigator. Monica, how come it seems like there were not bloody footprints, yet we saw pictures of blood basically oozing from the home?
Well, I had a client put Walmart bags on his feet and hands before he went in and, killed 3 people. And that was a stabbing, slashing, terrible, terrible event. And the child was actually found laying in the mother's blood, and there was no evidence outside of the house. And it was just something as simple as wrapping their feet in Walmart bags. And again, like Tracy said, if we didn't have snow on the ground at the time, and then by the time they're found, there's snow on the ground, you have all of these natural environmental factors that change the dynamics of what we have at the scene.
It's interesting. I'm reading this comment, made me think of something else, and I've got ADD, admittedly. So we had a woman named Ann Burgess on, who is an original FBI mind hunter. Tracy, if you're a geek, you should know who she is, and you can look her up afterwards. She's 86 years old, and is still way more lucid than I am. And she's not coughing and sneezing either. But she and another gentleman we had, Gary Bricado, who is a PhD who studies serial killers, they were on the show. They're, by the way, on our first episode that got 100,000 views. So people, not just myself, I wasn't the only one interested. The point I'm making is they said, they reached out after the fact and said, hey, look at this one comment. I should have brought it. I said I was going to do this yesterday. I didn't do it again. That's what having 3 kids does to you. But it was a comment that really stood out. It was very misogynistic, basically blaming women for everything, putting all the blame on women, a lot of anger and resentment towards women. And the person who studies, Gary Bricado, studies serial killers for a living, said, this is the mind frame of the killer right here, this comment. And then Anne chimed in and said, I wouldn't really be surprised at all if the killer is watching your show and commenting, because they get off on it, which creeped me out a lot. But is there any validity to this, Tracy? What do you think of the fact that this person is out there watching the media, getting a sense of glorification from it?
Well, I think that's all the more reason why they're being so tight-lipped, right? I think we know that with most killers, they do things because, and particularly in this case, I have a feeling that this is someone who thinks that they were wronged in some way, shape, or form. I don't know if that's sexually. I don't know if that's monetarily. I don't know what that is at this point. But I do think it's someone who believes that they're wrong and that these folks got what was, quote, coming to them. And so I do think this person is probably watching this show, other things, to almost bask sort of in that, hey, I showed them sort of glory, if you will. So I think it's almost to be expected that they would be basking in this. I don't know if this is a full-blown serial killer, right? That's going to do this. But at the same time, what I've seen is most people that sort of do things in these larger kind of ways is they want the glory that comes along with that.
And then Anne followed it all up by saying, hey, you should monitor your comments and look for a pattern. And I was like, Anne, I don't, how the hell do I know this? This is your field. So then I never heard back from her, but I'll get her back on the show. Monica, do you think this is not a comment, but a question to you? You think this is a rage killing, a serial killer? What's your take on all this? Your gut instinct.
I think it's targeted. I agree with Tracy, and I also agree with the police chief. I think it's targeted. I mean, we see in Uvalde a lot of school shooting cases, mass shooting cases, mass death, massacres, these clubs. It's somebody that's been wronged, and they go and they take out, they try and create as much chaos and damage as possible. This case is different to me because they targeted a house with like the 4 most beautiful people. I mean, these are like, the first thing that comes to my mind is like a wronged, a scorned young man. That's the first thing that comes to my mind. That's just what I think. I don't know anything, but I'm just saying, these are 4 beautiful people, 3 beautiful girls, an adorable young man. That seems very targeted to me. I mean, if it's a random killing, they just happen to find the house with the most beautiful people in the college there. I mean, what's the likelihood of that, Tracy? Like, you hit the lottery, you're going to kill the most 3 beautiful girls on campus. I mean, these are really attractive young women. So that's I think it's targeted. I think it's a man. I think it's somebody that's, we have such a problem with mental health and such a problem with psychotic medication, antipsychotic medication, people medicating with methamphetamine. We know if we tinker with one molecule, we get, Ritalin or Adderall, we change it just a little bit, we get methamphetamine. Everyone thinks they're a scientist. And now we've got a combination of severely mentally ill people strung out on really, really bad dope. And that it creates a problem.
everyone thinks they're a detective too, apparently, including
Right.
maybe myself. But back to this white Elantra. This comes from Emily. A couple more, and then we'll wrap it up. I know everyone's got other things to take care of, but from Emily, very important for people to realize that this white Elantra did not come forth immediately and turn themselves in. Everyone knows about this case in the United States, especially anyone in around the area at the time. This is an indication to me of guilt or involvement. Do you read that the same way, Tracy?
So I do, to be completely honest with you, because you have some folks who have come forward. I actually don't remember the gentleman's name. You know, it's interesting. I've tried really hard in terms of suspects that are being thrown out on that online sleuth community. I've been trying really hard to actually not remember their names because it's not fair to them to mention their names, in my opinion. But there was a gentleman who did submit himself for DNA testing because he was just so sick of being accused of being a suspect. And so I do think with all of the attention on this crime, and I think Monica was talking about earlier, if this was just some kids right out for a beer run, that they probably at this point, maybe not would have publicly stepped forward, but would have gone to the police and said, you know what, hey, I messed up. So sorry, I'm not part of this murder investigation. And so I do think that there may be something a bit more nefarious there and that no one really has stepped forward, particularly in this overabundance of information that we have.
Next comment from T-Town Trekker. Yet another great STS interview. Thank you. Something I can't reconcile is the 911 call. Monica, I'll have you take this one. The roommates evidently called friends that they couldn't wake up a roommate, meaning they called to say they couldn't wake up the roommate. They called their friends. The media reported the scene was a bloodbath, according to law enforcement. How could someone not at a minimum see blood splatter or bloody shoe prints going through the house, not to mention cut clothing, etc., and just call for an unresponsive roommate? I mean, I guess things get frenetic at the time of a crime, right? It's middle of the night. What's your take?
Well, my initial take is not, we can assume what that crime scene looks like, and it may be a bloodbath. I don't know anything about the wounds. So if they're not through and through wounds and somebody is stabbed in the chest and they're laying on their stomach, it is possible that they don't see everything. But it's my understanding 2 of the girls were in the same room. So I don't disagree with the person making the comment. I thought that was really bizarre that they didn't walk in and go, holy smokes, this what the world, you know, what is all this? This is terrible. But I do recognize and I do understand sheer panic. And people in a panic situation will go with what they know. And that is call a friend. Oh my God, Sally's not getting up. Something's wrong. And then like the brain kicks in and it's like, we need to call 911. You're talking about 20-year-olds. These are not like seasoned adults. I mean, and I just am a big believer that people go, their first go-to is they would never believe this is what it appears to be. So they call the most closest person to them. That's what I think, because I can't wrap my head around any other thing than like, what in the world? Why wouldn't you just call 911?
Can I clarify really quick? I think information has actually come out about that. The 2 surviving roommates actually did go upstairs, saw a ton of blood, ran out of the house. And one tried to call 911. And while she was on the phone with 911, she actually passed out outside. And because there was just so much commotion and screaming and whatever, people and friends started coming out to get them. They then called 911 again and said that they had an unresponsive person in the front yard, which they did. Those folks hadn't gone into the house and seen sort of what had happened. So hopefully that helps kind of clarify, you know, the 911 situation. All of those reactions actually make sense. I think they walked upstairs, probably hungover. Let's be honest, they're 20, 21, probably hungover, saw just a shit
chaos,
right? And gore and all of this, ran out calling 911 in their haze, probably passed out once they realized what they were seeing. I think that all sort of makes sense to me and explains that first call about an unresponsive female, because I think there was an unresponsive female laying in the yard. They had said that that one roommate passed out.
Two more quick comments and we'll call it a wrap. This one comes from Donnie Lynn. What's the possibility of two suspects, maybe a guy and a girl, a couple who had a disagreement with people in the house? What are your thoughts, Tracy? I added the Tracy part, but everyone's jumping to the conclusion that it's one male. Could it be another combination of more than one person or a female involved?
I mean, look, I'm literally guessing at this point, right? Like I'm not there. I'm not on the scene. But typically what I've seen is when you have more than one killer, it becomes sloppy. Someone's going to leave something more behind. I think this is someone who probably, the reason that there might not be buddy footprints, I've seen this before, they took off their shoes before they entered the house and then put them back on, on their way out. And so I think this is probably the work of one male. I could be wrong. I'm sure I am, but I just think, particularly when you have a crime of stabbing in nature, that's messy, that's gory, that hurts, and you get kind of secondary wounds that go along with that. And so that's why I think it's probably just one person. I could be wrong.
And a final comment, and I swear I did not pick this commenter's name. I just noticed it now. It's kind of funny. Mom Jeans. She says, I feel like everyone is assuming someone akin to Rambo carried out these vicious murders. However, it would not surprise me if the perp is kind of geeky, lean, and timid looking in stature. He probably makes himself small. I mean, as an example, look at what Chandler Halderson did to his parents. The monsters walk amongst us. I'm not familiar with that case. I should be. But what about the fact that, when we talked about this briefly, Monica, to you first, and then Tracy, that this could be someone you're totally not expecting it to be?
Yeah. Listen, none of my clients wear hats and go, hey, I just slaughtered a family. Pick me. I want to get sentenced to death. That is just my opinion. Also, when we talk about it being one, I always struggle with this. I struggled with this on the Segura case terribly. And that is, once you pierce somebody's skin with a really sharp knife, I would imagine they're going to wake up, and they're going to wake up swinging. So that's probably going to wake up the person next to them. And then we're going to have screaming. And then I just don't see how you slash all these people up one at a time as one person and keep everybody quiet. Like, I mean, Tracy, does that ever?
Yeah, Tracy, your thoughts on that? Because that's the $64,000 question.
Well, and I've thought about that too. Did someone go upstairs, right, and someone went downstairs, right? Like that would make sense. Also, I was in a sorority back in the day. I was 20 before, and I had been so drunk that I couldn't react, perhaps in a way, if someone got me while I was sleeping, that we would assume someone who wasn't intoxicated would. Right. I'm not assuming these folks were horribly intoxicated. I have absolutely no idea. I would imagine they already have toxicology back on them. But if you I mean, we have to remember they had probably just got done partying by that point, right? They got home at 1:32 and then probably passed out. That would be my guess. And so I don't know. I don't know if they were too drunk to scream. I don't know if they were too passed out to fully understand what was happening to them. So alcohol is like that mitigating factor in there for me, that if they were completely sober victims, yeah, I think someone had to have gone upstairs, someone had to have gone downstairs, but I don't know that that's the case here. But again, I'm just guessing.
Yeah, I'm certainly not a profiler, but I always just wonder, like, how does one person manage all of this chaos? And, I mean, it's been done, unfortunately. But that's just one thing, is just like an average person. I'm like, how would you do that? Like, how could you? But then again, I'm not breaking into people's homes and
there's also a lot of talk about how no screams were heard, at least, that were reported. which seems strange because, again, it's like you said, if you're going to stab someone, they're going to wake up probably swinging, unless, they're under the influence. But I
Well,
want to give you each, Monica,
I
just a
was just gonna-
final thought and go.
I
go
was
for
just
it.
gonna say, if you got some, I mean, we don't know what the wounds are. So if the first wound on each person is right through the heart, then that stops everything. So, and we don't know any of that, so it's hard to form a meaningful opinion about just making stuff up.
Well, we had a Navy SEAL on, Jonathan Gillum, who it was a little tough to listen to, but number one, talked about how difficult it actually is to kill someone, the strength involved. Because originally there were some reports, and this again was from Kaylee's father, that his daughter was stabbed worse than the others. Jonathan said it could just be a factor that, the killer was exhausted by the time he got to the other people, let's say. It's interesting, it's interesting, obviously, why there's no scream, no one knows. But Jonathan went on to say too that, you can incapacitate a person, like you said, Monica, very, very quickly. And they, you get them in their air pipe and they're not screaming at all, So that's a pretty gory, macabre way to end it. But Monica, any final thoughts? Where do we go from here? And then Tracy, I'll get yours and we'll wrap it up.
Well, I just, I hope that they continue to work and not get blindsided and bogged down with peripheral things that are not important. I hope the family, I will continue to pray for them, and I wish all the peace in the world for them. This is a horrible, horrible thing, but I do want the cops to get it right, because that will just compound this tragedy.
Tracy?
I just want the public to be patient. I do think that this case is going to be solved. I really do. I just think that it's going to take time. And my heart really goes out to these families. I truly cannot even imagine what they are going through. And I hope that this gets solved in relative speed to sort of help them begin to heal.
Well, you just heard from two of the very best at what they do. Tracy Walder, on the bottom of your screen, was both in the CIA's Counterterrorism Center Weapons of Mass Destruction Group. And then, as if that was not enough, she was in the FBI's Chinese Counterintelligence team. I hope her daughter is learning Mandarin. She's also the author of The Unexpected Spy. Buy it, read it, let us know what you think. And then you've got Monica Jordan, president of Jordan Research and Consulting, who will be on 2 episodes of Surviving Survivor simultaneously, one on this case and one on the Dan Markel case, so she can really do it all. Thank you, guys. Thank you so much. Come back for our next episode. Love you, America.